Oh, hello there. I'm Bilchan.
I'm Nimakong.
I'm Banchan.
In this class, I'll read to all of you. Chapter 6, Section 2 of A Tale of Two Cities, Book the First Recalled to Life.
As.
Ah.
A Tale of Two Cities, Book the First Recalled to Life. Charles Dickens. Chapter 6, Section 2. Well, I was not a shoemaker by trade. I learnt it here. I taught myself. He lapsed away. Even 4 minutes. Raining those measure changes on his hands the whole time. His eyes came slowly back. At last. To the face from which they had wandered. When they rested on it, he started and resumed, in the manner of a sleeper that moment awake, reverting to a subject of last night. I asked leave to teach myself, and I got it with much difficulty after a long while, as he held out his hand for the shoe that had been taken from him. Mister, Laurie said, still looking steadfastly in his face. Monsieur Manette. The shoe dropped to the ground, and he sat looking fixedly at the questioner. Monsieur Manette. Mister. Louis laid his hand upon Defarge's arm. Do you remember nothing of this man? Look at him. Look at me. Is there no old banker? No old business? No old servant? No old time? Rising in your mind, as the captive of many years sat looking fixedly, by turns, I missed you. We ain't at Defarge. Some long obliterated marks of an actively intent intelligence in the middle of the forehead gradually forced themselves through the black mist that had fallen on him. They were overclouded again. They were fainter. They were gone. But they had been there. Had crept on the wall to a point where she could see him. And where she now stood looking at him, with hands which at first had been only raised in frightened compassion, if not even to keep him off and shut out the sight of him, but which were now extending towards him, trembling with eagerness to lay the spectral face upon her warm young breast. Stronger characters on her fair young face, that it looked as though it had passed like a moving light, from him to her. Darkness had fallen on him in its place. He looked at the two, less and less attentively. Aloud. Finally, with a deep long sigh, he took the shoe up and resumed his work. Have you recognized him, Monsieur? Asked Defarge in a whisper. Yes. For a moment. At first I thought it quite hopeless. But I have unquestionably seen, for a single moment, the face that I once knew so well. Osh. Let us draw further back. She had moved from the wall of the garret, very near to the bench on which he sat. Its hand and touched him as he stooped over his labour. Not a word was spoken. Not a sound was made. She stood, like a spirit, beside him, and he bent over his work. It happened, at length, that he had occasion to change the instrument in his hand for his shoemaker's knife. Stood, He had taken it up and was stooping to work again, when his eyes caught the skirt of her dress. He raised them and saw her face. The two spectators started forward, but she stayed them with the motion of her hand. She had no fear of his striking at her with the knife, though they had. He stared at her with a fearful look, and after a while his lips began to form some words, though no sound proceeded from them. By degrees, in the pauses of his quick and laborious breathing, he was heard to say, with the tears streaming down her face. She put her two hands to her lips and kissed them to him, then clasped them on her breast, as if she laid his ruin hid there, not yet trusting the tones of her voice. She sat down on the bench beside him. He recoiled, but she laid her hand upon his arm. A strange thrill struck him when she did so, and visibly passed over his frame. He laid the knife down softly, as he sat staring at her. Her golden hair, which she wore in long coils, had been hurriedly pushed aside, and fell down over her neck. Advancing his hand by little and little, he took it up and looked at it. In the midst of the action he went astray, and then, with another deep sigh, fell to work at his shoemaking, but not for long. Releasing his arm, she laid her hand upon his shoulder. After looking doubtfully at it 2 or 3 times, as if to be sure that it was really there, he laid down his work, put his hand to his neck, and took off a blackened string with a scrap of folded rag attached to it. He opened this carefully on his knee, and it contained a very little quantity of hair, not more than 1 or 2 long golden hairs, which he had, in some old day, wound off upon his finger. He took her hair into his hand again, and looked closely at it. It is the same. How can it be? When was it? As the concentrated expression returned to his forehead, he seemed to become conscious that it was in hers too. He turned her full to the light, and looked at her. She had laid her head upon my shoulder. That night when I was summoned out, she had a fear of my going. To be continued.